put the place up. Put my face up. Why you doing all that? Thought you was my wife, but you slapped me in the back.
So if you don't already know what we're talking about today, we're talking about ND filters, variable ND filters at that. The Peter McKinnon edition. So what do ND filters do? They're just like sunglasses to your eyeballs. When we go outside and it's really bright, our eyes automatically adjust, but sometimes it's just too intense and too bright outside. So what do? We throw on sunshades and it just helps our eyes balance out brightness. ND filters are basically the same thing for your camera lens, but why are they used on a camera? They're used to get the 180-degree rule that we're supposed to follow. So in order to get the proper motion blur when you're shooting video, you want to keep your shutter speed double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 frames per second, you want to be around a 48 to 50 if you're shooting on a DSLR. That is a rule to get the motion blur, and that's what looks best. In order to keep your bokeh in your shots, keep a low aperture and a low ISO, and keep your shutter speed doubled, you're gonna need sunglasses to balance out the exposure. Even with slow motion, your shutter speed is supposed to double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, you want to be around a 120 on your shutter speed. And if you're shooting 120 frames per second, then you obviously want to be at a 240, 250 on DSLR with your shutter speed. It's a very simple rule, but when it's super bright outside, it's hard to maintain that. And that's where ND filters come in. They really help you out with your videos. They save your videos. Now, some people might disagree and they might just crank up their shutter speed to get their exposure right. But when you crank your shutter speed up, you actually have a lot of jitters and movement. If you're shooting handheld, you want to stray away from too much movement and jitters and just weird looks in your video. So ND filters save that. They save that jitter. They save that weird look to your video. All around helpful to make your videos look more professional. So if you look here, here's a couple of examples of actually passing by objects. There's motion blur when you're passing by objects with the ND filter. On the other side, we have the shutter speed cranked up shooting the same thing, and without the filter, everything's kind of in focus, so it doesn't really show any transition or motion blur or movement. It's kind of all just sharp and all in focus, which doesn't really make for a great shot. And then just in general, looking at these clips right here, you see the movement difference. A lot more motion blur and just smooth cinematic looking shots with the ND filter, and without the ND filter, just a lot of jittery and just really wild movements. So if it's super bright outside and you're trying to keep those proper settings, the ND filter will really help. So on the flip side, let's talk about photography. In photography, you don't necessarily need the ND filter at all when you're taking photos, because you can crank your shutter speed up, because it's the complete opposite. You want a photo to be sharp, crisp, and snapped really fast. You don't want a lot of motion blur, because if somebody's moving or if you're moving, you might not get that crisp shot that you need. So photography, you don't necessarily need it, only in one condition. If you're shooting photo time lapses and you want to have motion blur in them, which it's really cool and cinematic to have a time lapse with motion blur in it, then you're gonna want to keep your shutter speed really low. So if you're out in the bright daylight and you're trying to capture a time lapse with motion blur in it, it's not happening without an ND filter. So for this video, I was actually using the Peter McKinnon edition PolarPro variable ND filter. That was like a lot of words, but yes, the key word is variable. So a variable ND filter is much better because you can actually have different stops. You can use just a little bit of the ND filter, or you can really darken it up if it's really bright outside. They also have two versions to this. They have a 2 to 5 stop and I think a 6 to 9 stop. One that's really intense and one that's just, you know, on some daily content creating intensity. That's the one I have. I have a 2 to 5 stop. So some scenarios it might be really bright outside. I'll boost it to a stop 5. And then other scenarios like today, I didn't have to go all the way down. I could go to a 3 or 2 or 4. Being able to have options on how intense it is just really helpful out in the field. And last but not least, man, one more tip for you guys. Grab you some Stepup Rings. That way, whatever the thread is on your biggest lens, you can get your variable ND filter to fit that thread, and then Stepup Rings will go smaller and smaller in thread to fit all your other lenses that are smaller than that. So you don't have to buy a filter for each and every lens. So that was just a quick video kind of breaking down ND filters, and I really hope that this video helped you and kind of gave you some insight and knowledge on what they're actually for. Doing video, you're definitely going to need an ND filter, especially on those bright days, and you might as well just grab you a variable ND filter just to be able to do different intensities. Hope that this video helped you guys. If it did, slap the like button, share it for some other creatives to see, and let me see a comment down below and let me know what you think about ND filters, because some people, they're just like, I don't need one, I just crank up my shutter. And I used to be one of those people until my boy YC Imaging kind of opened my eyes to it, and it's just saved like a lot of videos for me and made things look 10 times better. Shout out to PolarPro. Make sure that you guys hit the link down below and go check them out. They're an amazing company that makes tons of filters even for your drones. All out amazing company, man. Thank you guys over there. And shout out to the homie Peter McKinnon for collaborating with PolarPro and creating this filter for the culture, the whole creative community. I'm done here. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.